Waking up the day after his 70th birthday, this wasn't the news Vladimir Putin wanted. The Kerch bridge, his pet project which linked the annexed Crimea to the Russian mainland, lies partially in ruin. The rail section charred, the road to Russia now detours into the water. What and who did this? The Russians said a truck bomb caused the partial collapse of 2 sections and the fire spread to a train carrying fuel. This afternoon, cars were allowed to cross on the one remaining lane, and the Russians said trains can resume this evening.
Today and until the end of the day, a government commission with my involvement will work to figure out the extent of the damage and discuss plans for a permanent and temporary restoration of the road and repairing the railway if needed.
In Kyiv, this is something they've long dreamt of. They already had this image on display in the capital. Ukraine hasn't claimed responsibility, but they're basking in the glow of the burning bridge.
We've been waiting for this moment when the bridge burns. I think all Ukrainians have been waiting for this, and we're very happy.
The news is good. It's too bad it didn't happen on Putin's birthday, but I think he'd be happy with this present.
On Twitter, the head of Ukraine's National Security Council posted this serenade. And an advisor to President Zelensky said this was just the beginning, that everything illegal must be destroyed. And this is why that worries Moscow. Ukraine is currently making gains in a counter-offensive in the Kherson region in the south of the country. At present, Russia can supply its troops there through territory it holds along the Sea of Azov, as well as through Crimea. Ukraine is thought to be planning another offensive to retake land down towards Melitopol and the coast. That would sever the link to Russia, meaning the only land route for Putin to supply his forces is through Crimea.
If the bridge is damaged severely and trains could not use it for some time, it will mean that for Russian units around Kherson, there will be a lack of supply, a lack of logistics.
If the plan was to destroy the bridge, they haven't, have they? It's only damaged.
The bridge can be just damaged, but Putin's image is destroyed.
So how will Putin respond? Could he go nuclear? This has been a bruising few weeks of Ukrainian victories. This is the latest result of shelling in the Donetsk region. A new overall commander for the Russians was announced today as they try to regroup. And Ukraine will hope this proves they can now push them back not just to February's borders, but even reclaim Crimea itself. Because this is a symbolic moment. The bridge's opening was Putin's Crimea coronation. He personally drove the first truck across, and he boasted of his triumph.
At different historical times, even during the era of the Tsars, people dreamed of building this bridge. Thanks to your work, your talent, this project, this miracle has become true.
The great Tsars may not have built this bridge, but they aren't remembered for defeats either. Peter the Great gained land and made St. Petersburg his window to Europe. This was Putin's pathway to Crimea. Now it's up in smoke, damaged, just like his reputation and his so-called special operation.
Well, joining me now is the former United States ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. Ambassador, given the huge symbolic and strategic significance of the bridge, how big a setback do you think this is for Putin?
Kathy, I think this is an enormous setback. Strategically, as your good report just pointed out, this is the way that the Russians have been supplying the ammunition, the soldiers, the equipment, the logistics for their attacks against Ukrainian forces in Kherson. This will clearly be disruptive of that flow. And the Russian soldiers around Kherson were already in trouble. They have been captured. They have been pulled over. They've been isolated on the western side of the river. And so this disruption to their supplies makes them further vulnerable.
Well, given the humiliation, really, public humiliation around the world for Putin, is there a fear then that he could retaliate, and indeed he's being pushed to do so by hardliners in Moscow, in some more deadly way, you know, God forbid, a nuclear attack, perhaps.
And this pressure on him has been there for weeks. They've been doing badly. The Russians have been doing very badly for weeks, indeed months. They've had a very bad 8 months. They've been pushed out of Kiev, as we know. They've been pushed out of Kharkiv, as we know. They were pushed out of Izum, Liman, and now they're being pushed out of Kherson. So they've had a terrible military disaster on their hands. They've been replacing generals, one after the other. Over the past, and again, just today, they've replaced yet another Russian general.
Well,
so they've got a big problem.
Well, I was going to say, does that new senior commander, who's in charge of Russia's operations in Syria, does that suggest a potential change of tack now, which could be an escalation or not?
So, Kathy, they've been escalating in terms of just killing and damaging and bombing civilian targets for months. The butcher of Syria that we're talking about here is continuing that horror, continuing those war crimes. So they are looking for more of that. Undoubtedly, the Russians will continue that tactic. That's what the Ukrainians have been pushing back in. That's why the Ukrainians are fighting so hard and so successfully to get the Russians out of their country.
Well, if we look at that success from the Ukrainians and this audacious, they haven't claimed responsibility, but if they do, it's an audacious attack on the bridge. Is it possible to contemplate that they might be able to retake Crimea, which would have seemed fanciful just a few months ago?
It would have seemed fanciful. You're absolutely right. Crimea is going to be very difficult. As your report pointed out, the Ukrainians are pushing very hard against the Russians in Donbass, in the northeastern part of the country. They are having great success up there. They could well go past the February 24th lines that were the lines when the Russians invaded big time. We remember the Russians invaded in 2014 and occupied some part, and the Ukrainians could push them out of those occupied parts of Ukraine since 2014. So could they go after Crimea? They could. It'll be hard, but now they're demonstrating that the Russian forces in Crimea are vulnerable.
And your president has been speaking about Armageddon, but he's also been speaking about an off-ramp for Putin. Given your role as a former diplomat, how best to ensure that Putin has the latter and not the former at his disposal?
So President Biden did mention off-ramp, but he's not, I didn't hear him talking about us providing Putin an off-ramp. What President Biden said was Putin is looking for an off-ramp, and he undoubtedly is, since it's going so badly for him. The problem for Putin is he doesn't have one. And so the question about nuclear it's a serious question. You have to take it seriously when the leader, the dictator of a big nation that has nuclear weapons talks irresponsibly about it, but he knows what happens. He knows it's going to be a catastrophic response if he should use those kinds of weapons.
And briefly, people have been saying, given it is going so badly for Putin, it's not impossible to think that he could be defeated by Christmas. Is that over-optimistic in your view?
No, I don't think it's over-optimistic at all. I think the Russians could be defeated in Ukraine by Christmas, which will be a big problem for Putin, and he's going to have domestic problems on that. But the Ukrainians are clearly on a roll. Their military has shown that they can beat the Russians everywhere they push. So no, it's not overly optimistic. It certainly could happen by Christmas.